Meanwhile, there are reports that Iran and the U.S. might meet for talks again for negotiations following their failure to reach a deal in Islamabad on Saturday. Well, we're going to talk more about this now with France 24's Angela Diffley, who joins me on set. Angela, let's start first with the Strait of Hormuz. How is this blockade working at the moment? And there have been reports of Chinese ships going through the strait. Tell us more.
Yeah, various organisations are trying to track this, but it is very difficult because some vessels turn off their transponders, which allow them to be tracked. Some sail under false flags. The United States has more sophisticated equipment. So what we know from what these organisations are reporting is that 4 vessels have transited the Strait of Hormuz, that 2 vessels have visited Iranian ports, and that 2 vessels have Chinese links. But we don't know if it is the 2 Chinese-linked vessels that have visited the Iranian ports. Either way, this is going to be watched really, really closely, because for this to work successfully, the idea was nobody goes into an Iranian port, nobody exits an Iranian port. And it could severely undermine the entire blockade. That said, it is possible that there is some kind of arrangement, some kind of understanding between Trump and China. They will certainly want to avoid any kind of standoff. We talked yesterday about the very concerning idea that US ships might try to seize a Chinese ship. That seems to be an unthinkable scenario that everyone would want to avoid, 2 nuclear powers there. It might be that there is some sort of understanding that the Chinese will try to persuade Iran to end the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, perhaps in return for access to Iranian ports. And China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil, so they really do have leverage there. It also matters significantly to the Chinese. It is not their only source of oil. They also buy Russian oil. They have a fairly diverse sourcing of oil, but they will not want their own economy hit either. There could be signs that perhaps Iran is keen to avoid a choke on its economy. Until now, China had really tried to stay outside this conflict. It is useful for China just to see how it plays out. It has been distracting the United States. The United States has moved military resources from, for example, South Korea, a domain of interest for China, for use in the Middle East. So there had been some upsides for China to stand on the sidelines. And some of the Gulf states who also have good relationships with China were very disappointed when China, with Russia, vetoed a Bahrain proposal for a United Nations-backed military mission to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. They were pretty disappointed by that. Worth mentioning on this Hormuz issue, this Franco-British initiative, there will be a conference in Paris on Friday to look at ways of doing that once the war is over.
In the meantime, what's behind these reports of further talks, perhaps, between the U.S. and Iran?
Yeah, the New York Times is reporting and citing sources that at the talks on Saturday, that Iran proposed to suspend its nuclear program for 5 years, that the United States rejected that idea, said that wasn't enough, maintained the idea of at least 20 years. There are also questions about, how inspectors would access nuclear sites, whether nuclear facilities would be destroyed, what would happen to the the highly enriched uranium that we know about. So those areas still red line areas, and they did not make significant progress, but there was some movement on it, it seems. That is news to everybody. It is being said now that there is likely to be further talks between Iran and the US. Donald Trump is saying Iran is calling for talks. That's worth what it is, coming from Donald Trump. But perhaps Iran is fearful of a chokehold on its economy. There is as well, we are hearing, but very difficult to tell from outside, division within the IRGC and the Iranian leadership. We know that they are scattered around Iran since the decapitating of a lot of the senior leadership. Their strategy was to distribute themselves around the country. They're having difficulty perhaps communicating with each other. So we don't quite know. That said, there are also probably divisions in the White House. But it looks like there might be movement towards more talks on this.